I'm Matt Wilhelmy. I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What's Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth. And today I am joined by Kristen McAlister. She is the co-owner and president of Cerius Executives, which is a really fantastic firm that she's going to tell you about here in a second. But she's got over 15 years experience working with business leaders on some of the more intimate issues and dynamics of their C-suite that we're going to be diving into today. But Kristen, thanks so much for spending some time with me.
Matt, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a privilege.
Yeah, so I would love if we could get maybe just a quick background on Cerius Executives, kind of what is it? How does it work? What can you tell our viewers about the company?
Absolutely. So we started in probably 20 years ago as a consulting company and realized that companies really needed hands-on support. I even personally was a consultant for a couple of years, and it just didn't make sense as I was working with companies and helping them figure out what to do and telling them what to do. I realized they needed some additional hands-on help from inside the company on a daily basis to make that change to how should we be doing it? What should we be doing? How do we make decisions? They needed extra bandwidth. They needed extra additional expertise. So that's where we went to the pivot from kind of coaching and telling companies what to do to stepping inside the company and helping them actually get things done. I got connected with what was then Cerius Interim Executive Solutions to be an interim. I thought this was the best concept ever. Where was it when I was growing a company from 5 million to 45 million in a year and a half? We could have really used this help, and we've grown it from there. We've worked with hundreds of companies, helping them figure out what do they need to accomplish and figuring out what's the right expertise and experience to do that.
I think that's so important because there's so many business owners that have some things figured out, but maybe don't even know what they don't have figured out. And so you're able to kind of quickly diagnose that. You've probably seen these things before. You've maybe even sat in their chair before and ran, a company or played these different roles in these different companies. And so it's always great to have an advisor that knows a little bit more than just what they read in a book or what they read in a blog or learned in school. You did go to school. You have your MBA, which is very, important to remind some of our viewers. But I think there's also a lot to be said for kind of been there, done that, seen this before, know how to handle it. That decision-making skill when you're working in a dynamic, fast-paced environment is so important. What are some of those, things that maybe you look for when you are kind of onboarding a potential new client, kind of getting to know them? What are some of those pain points that you undoubtedly uncover? Maybe you're well aware of kind of where some of those conversations go, but what are some of those common ones that you see?
Matt, thanks. Probably one of the most common ones is what we get called for is not what we're actually needed for. So that's where my team, myself, a number of years going through what are the questions that we need to ask to get to what's the actual problem, not just the pain point. So one of the common ones that we will often get called in on is, I've got a marketing problem. We have it's more like we've got a sales problem. Absolutely no sales. Our leads have dried up. We need someone to come in and whip our sales team into shape and get more leads in here. And as we're talking through it, we're asking the questions, where have the leads come from? Where do they need to come from? What are you doing to support inbound, outbound with marketing? Turns out they've got a marketing problem, not as the pain is being felt by the sales team, but the problem is marketing. You see something similar, we get called in to help with operations. That's a tough thing for someone to come in and make an impact in operations when there's no reporting, no numbers, no KPIs, no financial support. We need to put an interim CFO in before that interim COO can do much. So the difference between what's the pain you're feeling and what's the problem, and really diagnosing what's the first step so we're not burning time, we're not burning cash.
Yeah, we don't want to be burning time or cash. As somebody who tends to play the CFO role when I go into companies, I have a background in finance. And so I think that that's a really important kind of concept that you just alluded to, which is the pain that you're experiencing might not be the actual root cause. You know, a lot of times when I go into these organizations, they are experiencing some different pains. Maybe it's the IT company or the IT department, I should say, basically saying, hey, you know, our vendors aren't getting paid fast enough. You know, we don't know when the payments are going out. And so do we have cash? And maybe it's the marketing team saying, well, the CFO never approves our budget. And so anyway, there's just these common problems. But what I end up noticing is that the problems are a little bit deeper usually, right? Sometimes it's just a communication thing. You know, sometimes it's everything is actually working fine, but because nobody knows what's going on, there are issues that come up. There's questions and there's concerns. And so that's refreshing to hear. I think that somebody like yourself, you know, who's kind of been there and done this a number of times in a number of different companies. You mentioned the one organization, you know, from 5 to 45 million in 18 months. I mean, you've probably seen a number of different things come up, but that gives you that authority to be able to say, I have seen this before. If we go the wrong direction, it's going to go badly because I've seen it, or we could go the correct direction because I've seen that work too. And I think that's really important because the case study I wanted to present to you today, Kristen, is kind of a big one. It's one that I wanted to save for kind of the right guest, somebody who, again, has been there, done that on a very, very high level, working with boards, working with big organizations with big budgets. And so I think it's worth noting, you know, when we are talking about some of these issues, it's really important to kind of clarify the context, because if we don't know how big the organization is, we don't know maybe if there's a board involved, the advice could be different. And so in this particular case study, Kristen, just to make sure we're on the same page, I was actually doing a workshop. I was at a incubator EDU program, if anyone's familiar with that. It kind of launched here in Chicagoland area, but basically it went national very quickly. And so a few summers ago, I was actually conducting this workshop. There was, you know, probably hundreds of different faculty and volunteers gathered to kind of learn about how this program could really help some of the local high schools. And there were some folks there who also worked at universities in the area as well. And so I was actually fortunate enough to be offered a chance to kind of present and do this workshop on entrepreneurship. I thought it was a really great opportunity. Well, when I finished presenting, one of the audience members actually approached me, and this person happened to be a board member from a university in the state of Michigan, which is pretty cool, you know, to have somebody like that in the audience. And really what they said was, hey, you know, we really want to take this program and expand it at our university. We want to expand our entrepreneurial offerings. Can you help us? It's not a small task, but Matt, you know, maybe you can, you know, help us out with your process, and we can go from there. And so what I wanted to talk to you about, Kristen, with this case study are some of the issues that I noticed. As I'm sure you're probably already thinking, there are going to be some issues that come up, regardless of how good of a job I do. Anytime you're talking about higher ed, you know, you're talking about a board, there's probably trustees, there's, you know, big donors involved. There's going to be some kind of common issues that come up. Well, I went through my process. You know, I thought I was doing everything right. I have worked with boards before. I've worked with universities before. And so I did my homework. I interviewed the key faculty members. I talked to the students that were involved in kind of spearheading this. I talked to some of the sponsors of the university. And then I was asked to present my findings for the kind of the next phase of my plan to the board. And this is where the wheels kind of started to fall off. There was some dysfunction. There were infighting in the board. Maybe you're not even surprised to hear that, but everybody on the board didn't exactly see eye to eye. And so there was some dysfunction with like literally agreeing on even what the key issues were. There was a significant lack of team cohesion, lack of organizational trust, and the board members, they just weren't in tune with basically industry trends to be the best team to kind of move this university in the next chapter of its existence. So I'm wondering, Kristen, from all of this background, how would you kind of help out? What would be maybe those first few questions that you'd want to ask to really start to evaluate what's the root cause of what's going on here?
Thank you. And yes, working with boards is a little different than when you're working with a business owner who can unilaterally make decisions. But then they still have a leadership team, and you've got to understand all those levels and layers and the interconnectivity. One of the things with working with boards is they're there to represent and protect and have a responsibility to the organization. But as humans, that's sometimes really hard. So having individual conversations, one, is it agreement across the entire board, or can we have a committee for this? Do you need agreement across all 15 individuals, or can we get a committee into 5? And sometimes just giving a little bit of guidance as to what should their process be from all of yours experience and my experience, what would be a good process for coming up with how are we going to make the decision and what that decision is. So then you've got who are the individuals in that decision-making process, what is that committee, and then meeting with each one of them individually. Because if we don't understand what their individual decision-making is, what their goals are, especially from a board perspective, I worked with a nonprofit board and asked, how did you come to be on the board? And they said, well, I was doing so-and-so a favor. I had worked with this person before. I donated money. What is their motivation for being on the board? What are their goals? And understanding, because that is going to influence some of that decision making, and then understanding what's the outcome. You mentioned education or entrepreneurship program, working with a university here in California who's going through a similar process. And their motivation for putting an entrepreneurship program in place might be very different than the university you worked with. And then 5 or 10 individuals on that board may each have a separate motivation and the outcome they want from that program being in place. So really the first is we've got to understand what's driving us, what do they want, what does success look like, and get them aligned on that at the beginning.
Yeah, I can tell that you've talked to some boards before, because not everybody's on the same page and not everybody even has the same motivation. I mean, they might have kind of the big picture. We want the university to succeed. Okay, great. But the methodology of that and the practicality of that is probably executed extremely differently, depending on that person's background. Maybe there are other alliances. Maybe they've got other business interests that aren't really, above they're not under the table, but just like you don't know what they are. Their sister works in the university, or their cousin is, in charge of IT. I mean, you have no idea how these people get on the board. So it's really interesting. So in your work, with Cerius Executives, you do some work with boards as well, right? This isn't like something you're not familiar with. You've been here, you've done this.
Yeah, especially we do quite a bit. Even right now, we're doing quite a few interim CEO roles and placing CEOs. What do they need? And that's where you really have a diverse perspective when you're putting someone in, and it's not in the situation or the condition that you want it to be. You have a vision of what you want it to become, and that vision may not be the same for all. So in the university, why do we want this program? Do we want to drive brand awareness for the university, drive donorship from corporations? Do we want to drive increased attendance and revenues? Each of those may have a different path to get there. So we've got to understand, we do the same thing with boards of private companies, is understanding what's the outcome that you're looking for. Why are we bringing that why question? I'm sure you do that a lot, is, well, why is that? Almost to the point where they want to stop the conversation because we feel like we're having it with my 11-year-old asking, but why? Why is that? We've got to understand what's that motivation. Otherwise, as you said, we're just solving today's problem or the issues that exist today and not getting to where they want to be with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when you're talking about some of these strategic initiatives, they do have to be kind of forecasted out. You do have to have that CEO you mentioned, kind of leading the charge. And that's not to say that the board isn't going to be strategic, but you do kind of have to have one person, right? It's kind of like trailblazing the path forward, casting the vision, getting everybody excited about it. That's, a pretty key job of a CEO with a board. Well, Kristen, you had a couple different questions. I'm wondering if there's more information that I could give you about this particular board, because as a case study, I worked in this university setting for quite a while, trying to get this project moving. I'm wondering what other kind of things you'd like to know to kind of get to the bottom of maybe some of their root issues.
Yeah, beyond understanding what's the outcome, why do we want this program in place? Why do we feel that this program is the solution to what problem or what outcome we want? We've also got to talk, it's a university or any organization, what's the timeline expectation? What are the resources, kind of some of the parameters, and what are going to be the bottlenecks? Especially when you're working with boards, usually are not in place because it's a simple situation. You've got a number of fiduciaries, you've got a number of stakeholders, and there's going to be some bottlenecks. Let's plan for those up front. And that's where sometimes the skeletons come out of the closet. Well, there's this one thing that we're going to have to go through for a state mandate, and it comes up in the, how are we going to mitigate? What do we need to plan for? Because the solution might be a little different if it's a 2-year process in order to get approval through the state or through the trustees than if all of the decision making is there with the board. So really understanding some of those, some of the bottlenecks or risks that we need to mitigate. At that point, we can then start to lay out the plan for what's the experience, what's the expertise, what is it going to take to put together, and understand where we currently at, where do we want to get to, what's the gap in between, and what are going to be the hurdles to get there.
I think you did a really great job of like packaging that, because again, I can tell you've done this once or twice, Kristen. I think one of the things that we kind of chatted about before we started recording was this phenomenon that happens probably more often than people even realize in business. And you mentioned your the company you helped with that you took from 5 to 45 million. This is probably prevalent in that organization, but it's this phenomenon that the people that got you to a certain point are maybe not going to be the same people that are going to get you to the next level or the level after that. And that's not their fault, but they served a purpose and they contributed. But now maybe it's time for a fresh look, or somebody who's kind of been there and done that and seen how that growth needs to go. How are you able to kind of figure that out? Is there an analysis that you do of kind of the people, or is there like a questionnaire you have people fill out? I'm just kind of curious. I don't need, maybe the secret sauce, but I'm just curious, if there is kind of an evaluation that you do to kind of see, do you have the right people that are going to help you kind of get to that next level?
There's certainly some hands-on assessment that we can do, but in general, anyone who's leading an organization, they already know if their company has outgrown the team or the individuals. The question becomes, and where someone like an on-the-job coach or someone from our team can help assess, is the person capable of developing the skills to grow with the company? Are they willing to develop those skills to grow with the company? And do you just need a team that can grow with the company, or some additional expertise to show the company how it can grow? Those are two very different. Can they be the ones behind the cart pushing it, or do you need some additional expertise to pull that cart forward? And that's some of that assessment where you might bring in someone like yourself saying, we've got a great accounting team. They know how to do this. We need to develop someone into a controller. You can help them do that. And we need to put a financial package in place and create it. And then you can show them how to maintain it. So there's a few different elements that we want to dive into and piece apart as to where they are at and what they need to get to. But I think as much as we can, how do we leverage the team that's there? And how do we develop the skills? And do they want to be developed? Sometimes the $5 to $45 million company, I was inside of it as the VP of operations. And there is no question about it. My hair was on fire every single day. And if a part-time advisor, fractional, any type of COO who had done that before could come in and work with me for a couple of weeks, give me those tools, we would have been so much further, quicker, save more money. We did a great job and our team figured it out. You have to with that type of growth. But having individuals who had done that before to give me the answer key and tell me what the answer is in 2 weeks, not letting me figure it out and fumble around for 2 months. I would have raised my hand in a heartbeat and said, I'm in over my head. So we find that's the case. We just need to give them some support.
I think that's so important, to allow people a little bit of room to fail, but also recognize when maybe there's too much room and, somebody needs to maybe come in and guide those conversations and kind of train up that team to kind of take them to the next level. Well, Kristen, this has been rich. I want to kind of summarize really quick where we're at before we move on to some cautionary tales, because I think it's important to just take a moment, make sure we're on the same page. When we're talking about boards, there's probably any number of maybe expected issues that you would see, whether that's, cohesion in the team, universality of opinions, politics, things like that. But I think, you had mentioned this earlier in our conversation, probably the number one issue that you're going to see is that there's typically some pain that they're experiencing that might not be the same as the root cause. And so kind of getting to the bottom of that, you would call it outcome-based thinking in our pre-show notes. So I thought that was really key. But the other one that you mentioned is this kind of lack of traction. Basically, what have you tried in the past? What worked? What didn't work? What you're really kind of getting at is trying to figure out what is that? Is there any sort of momentum kind of moving in the right direction, or are we literally at a standstill, at a barricade, and we have nowhere to go because we haven't gotten anything accomplished in the last 6 meetings? It's important to kind of delineate those different spots for the board. So I appreciate you kind of helping me get to the bottom of some of these issues. In our 3rd episode, we will jump into solving them. But for right now, I do want to give people just a little bit of a taste of where we're headed with these cautionary tales. Kristen's going to be nice enough to join us for another episode and talk about working with a board to kind of replace the 2nd generation CEO and how that process worked. She also has a story about working in a nonprofit, actually a few nonprofits, but one specifically with a board situation, replacing executive director. That one probably happens often, but this one specifically I'm looking forward to because I see the word divisive. And so I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that. I've got a cautionary tale as well. I am looking forward to sharing. This is really a story that it was a hard one because they didn't really take my advice, but it was this dysfunctional 2nd generation family business. I'm sure that you've seen lots of generational businesses. The 1st generation that kind of gets it started is very different than that 2nd generation trying to kind of come in and get things to move in the same direction. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to telling some stories with you in our next episode where we talk about some cautionary tales. Stay tuned.